Howdy folks, welcome to the second week of class material. This week we're covering biology and consciousness in psychology. So this week's going to be all about understanding how the body and mind work together, whether they're two separate things or whether they are indivisible. Is the body one thing on its own? Is the mind its own complete thing, or is it made up of separate ideas, parts, or pieces? To start off, I've got a couple quotes here and images that I like that represent what's going on in this chapter. On the top left, let's start with the quote from René Descartes. It says, "I suppose the body to be just a statue or a machine made of earth." This quote is from, I believe it's from the 1800s, and it brings up the idea that the body, your body, is a machine. It's made of earth, metals, and plastics. Well, maybe not plastics, but the same building materials that we use to make houses or food or just about anything else in the world. Despite it being organic, your body is made up of atoms, the same stuff that makes up everything else in this world. And if it's made up of atoms, then if we understand it completely enough, we might be able to make a body ourselves. And I'd like to introduce to you the idea that the body is not something, magical, but instead something that we can understand every little thing about. And if we put that up into our thinking space, then we're going to have to ask ourselves, well, is our mind separate from our body? Is our mind made up of entirely explainable bits of mechanisms and atoms and molecules? Are we born into this world through an exclusively understandable systems and laws of physics and chemistry? Well, in science we need to assume that. At this point, I would like to say that I personally believe that faith and science are perfectly interactable things that you can hold at the same time and still be a perfectly functioning person. I have nothing against either faith or science. However, we will be focusing on concrete, observable, provable scientific things in this lecture and in the rest of the course. Part of what we talked about last week was the idea of empiricism, the idea that in science we need to be able to gather evidence to prove or disprove theories. Faith is a completely different topic that works on a completely different set of rules, and so I'm really not intending to challenge your faith in any way during this course. If you have questions, concerns, or comments about that, let me know and we can work on things together. So, next quote, down at the bottom right, another one by René Descartes. There's a great difference between the mind and the body, insomuch as by nature the body is always divisible and the mind entirely indivisible. Sorry, I added a couple words in there, but the point René Descartes was trying to make is that the mind and body are two separate things based on the evidence that the body is always divisible, but the mind is not. Is the body divisible? Well, we know that you could chop your arm off and survive. We know that the body is made up of different organs and tissues, and those can be divided down into molecules and down into atoms and down further and further and further until we get the building blocks of the world. So, second claim, the mind is entirely indivisible. We need to talk about that because that's something that is no longer totally true. We know that the mind is made up of cells, just like the rest of the body, and we know that there are different types of cells at play. The mind has different bits to it. There are many ways to divide the mind. If you want to talk about it in terms of the brain, there are sections of the brain that accomplish different tasks, and within those sections there are subsections that accomplish different tasks. We'll learn more about that in this chapter. But if you would like proof that the mind is divisible, let's try a thought experiment. I've got a couple of these, so let me ask you a couple questions. First, have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to say a word, but you couldn't remember what the word was? You were saying, Goo Gone is a very effective way to clean clean something off of walls or hair or cans or something. What was that thing? Oh yeah, Goo Gone is a great way to clean gum off of your floor or walls. Okay, well, in that situation, if you forget a word, you have evidence that your mind is separated into two bits. Consciously, you know there's a word you're trying to say, but consciously, you don't know what that word is. You know the word, so somewhere kind of in your unconscious mind or in some corner of your mind, there is that word, but you can't seem to find it. That's one simple way to demonstrate that your consciousness is actually made up of multiple different things. It's kind of the sum of quite a few different parts. The idea that consciousness comes from a variety of systems working simultaneously is actually one of the most modern ideas in psychology. Trying to understand human consciousness is super, super difficult, but our ideas about how consciousness works have evolved over time. For example, it used to be, historically, people believed that there was a certain little bit in your brain, a certain gland, that held the connection to your soul, or that was the soul. We now know that that's not true. It's actually the pineal gland, and it handles hormones and controlling hormones in the rest of your body, and as well as the other glands. But I'm pretty sure that's true. I suddenly feel concerned that I might be wrong. We'll cover that gland later in this chapter, so we'll have trust the PowerPoints over my words. Sometimes I'll get a little bit stressed out and forget things, but sorry about that. If I made a mistake there, I'll double check and make a comment on the video if that's a mistake. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. Let's do another thought experiment. So think about this situation. Have you ever received or heard something and responded before you understood what you heard? So, a friend goes, "Hey, do you know where the cake is?" And you go, "Huh? Oh yeah, it's in the fridge." And for a split second, for just a moment, you know they said something, but you don't know what they said. You don't understand what they said. That's another way of telling you, showing you, that the mind is actually made up of multiple different systems. In that situation, what's going on is that your ability to hear and understand someone's talking to me, they want a response, is faster than your ability to understand what they said and figure out what the response should be. So in that case, your consciousness could be divided into two bits: hearing and responding, and understanding the information. We could go on forever providing proof that there are multiple parts to your mind. If you want more of those, ask me and I can come up with a couple of them on the spot, but I'd like to move on. If this is interesting to you, I'd really encourage you in your exit slip for this first class of the week, let me know. Do you have any other person examples that seem to show that your mind is separate or can be separated into multiple conscious bits? This third quote up here, top right, "The dogma of the ghost in the machine." Have you ever seen any of the Ghost in the Shell movies or TV shows? They are anime. I'm a nerd, and so I've seen quite a few of them, but they're really interesting. They're set in the future where everyone has a cybernetic brain. Now, that sounds really far-fetched, but one of the core questions of the show and movies is always, can we separate the human soul from the brain? So in that show, everyone's got a cybernetic brain because, it gives people longer lives. You don't have susceptibility to tumors in your brain. You have wireless internet connection, so you don't need a phone. You can talk to people. You can surf the web right in your own head. You can download information and learn stuff. It's almost like Alexa can learn stuff if you buy an idea. Why do I bring this up? Because it really does tie in to the question of, is your body and mind are your body and mind two separate things? If we can understand how the body works because it's made of stuff, does that mean we can understand how the mind works because it must also be made of stuff? There are many different answers to that, and we'll get to those answers, or at least some of them, but for now I'd like to just present those ideas to you. The last two things on this first slide. A picture of a duck, but this duck is special because you can see it's designed. It's made up of a bunch of mechanical parts, and the design kind of looks like it's from a long while ago because, yeah, it's kind of old. But I like this picture because it shows you how all of the jobs of your body could potentially be accomplished by machines. If we can make prosthetics for arms and legs and organs, is it possible that we could make prosthetics for your mind? Is it possible that we could make your body entirely, including your brain, and have you still be a working, functioning person with no difference between you and anyone else? The last picture over here is a picture from my favorite movie, Howl's Moving Castle. Once again, you can tell I'm a nerd because it's anime. In Howl's Moving Castle, there's this character. He's a scarecrow, but in actuality, he's a prince who is cursed into being a scarecrow. The reason I bring it up is because in the movie, he is one of the most human characters. Everyone in the show is a little weird, but despite being a scarecrow, he shows so many traits that we consider perfectly human. He shows empathy and love and worry and caring. He thinks about people while they're not around. He helps people in ways that they didn't even imagine he could help them. So again, let's ask the question, is your mind and body separable? Is there a soul? Well, let's get started on the material because I've gone on far enough. Shoot, this isn't quite the material yet. Just a little bit more intro for you. This is the cover for one of my most favorite books. It's by Isaac Asimov, another science fiction novel. Once again, nerd. It's from a series of books dealing with robots as well as investigating crime. So we've got our human investigator and a robot who is so like a person that most people can't tell that he's a robot. In fact, he is nearly indistinguishable. The only reason that our main character knows that he's a robot is that he is told, and in some cases shown. In fact, there's a moment where the main character, a person, human, asks his robot partner to prove to him that he's a robot, because he's so human-like that he was totally indistinguishable. So let me ask you this question. If we made a robot that was completely indistinguishable from a human, would you be able to say they're human? Let's say that we built their parts. They have all the organs that a person has. Their skin feels just like human skin. They have thoughts and ideas and emotions. They get hungry and sad, and they get sexually aroused. They can have children, in fact. If they are totally indistinguishable from a human, can we consider them to be human? The reason I pose this question is because as we learn more about how our bodies and minds work, how they're made up of the same atoms that everything else in this world is made out of, we need to start asking the question, just because we are made of material, does that make us unspecial? Does that make us unhuman? Does that make us a statue made of earth? I say no. I do think that there is a soul, and I do think that the mind is a special thing, but as a psychologist, I have to stick with the facts, and I can't say that I have evidence for those sorts of things. There is actually a cool website located at the end of the PowerPoint. Remember that the PowerPoints include extra material at the end, talking about whether or not people are machines. It's an interesting read, and I would really encourage you to take a look at it. Now, let's start off with one of the most important topics for this chapter. You'll have seen it in the first chapter's materials in a way. The mind and body are inseparable. We know this from the biopsychosocial approach. But let me give you one last bit of evidence that the body and mind are inseparable before we get started on the material proper. What happens when you feel angry or sad? Pay attention to what your body is doing. If you're angry, you might notice that your fists are clenched, your muscles are tensed up, your face is gritting those teeth and maybe squinting your eyes in anger. You might take on an angry physical posture. Now, it's not a surprise to find that if you're angry, your body will show that anger through its position and its setup. But have you ever considered that the opposite is true too? If you take up an angry posture and clench your teeth and hands and fists and tighten those muscles, if you physically make yourself look angry, your brain will hear that, notice that, and start to feel angry as well. So there's this kind of feedback that happens between your mind and your body. If you're feeling a certain emotion, your body will mirror that. If your body is showing a certain emotion, your mind will mirror that. Try this at home. Start making that angry posture. Start clenching your fists and your teeth and tensing your muscles. And see how you start to feel. In the same way, if you feel as though you're angry and you don't want to be, you want to control yourself, one of the best things that you can do is start by controlling your body. Loosen yourself up. If you get yourself in a physically calm, relaxed position, your mind will also follow suit and move towards being calmer and more relaxed. One of the reasons why folks who have anger issues are told to take a walk is because that will literally get their body loosened up, extract them from the situation, and that physical change towards a more loose physicality will help their mind become looser and calmer as well. This is true for any emotion at all, so feel free to give it a shot and think about other emotions as well as how they might relate to where your body's at. Okay, let's get to the material proper. This week's material has 4 parts. Number 1, building blocks of the brain. So pretty much we're going to talk about neurons. Part 2, the brain and the body, how those two things work together and are kind of inseparable. Number 3, structures of the brain. So how can we divide the brain up into different parts and pieces, and what do those different sections do? Lastly, consciousness. So how does our consciousness work? How are we aware of things going on in day-to-day life? I've got this GIF here of Jimmy Neutron. I wonder if you've ever seen this show. The reason I show it is because it's a visual representation of how thinking and coming up with ideas happens. And I kind of love this bit here where you can see neurons interacting with each other electrically. We'll learn more about those things and how they work in a moment, but you'll be surprised to see how this is a little bit more accurate to your brain than it might seem, given the fact that it's a cartoon. Okay, the human brain. It's made up of cells, just like the rest of your body. The cells in your brain are called neurons, and those neurons are a special type of cell that connects with other neurons to work with and to transmit information. You probably know that your body has nerves all throughout it that are used to send signals for control. Your brain sends a signal through your neurons so you can move your foot, for example. Neurons and nerves are sort of interchangeable. We'll learn a little bit more about that later. But for now, let's keep talking about neurons. Neurons interact with each other and talk to each other with something called neurotransmitters. Those are chemicals used to send signals between neurons, and they kind of each have different jobs. We'll learn a little bit more about different types of neurotransmitters later on. The connections between neurons are how we think, and making more connections between more neurons is tantamount to learning. Fun fact, you can think about the neurotransmitters as being a short-term bit of mental activity. They get wiped when you go to sleep. They kind of get cleaned up when you go to sleep. And so you forget a lot of the things that you did over the course of the day. And that's useful. You don't need to remember everything you've done every day. There's no point in remembering going to the bathroom 1,000,000 times during your lifetime. So the neurotransmitters get cleaned up, and that's their job. They're short-term information transmission. Physically growing new neurons and growing new neuronal connections is how longer-term learning happens. And so it makes sense that it would take a while for learning to happen, since it takes a while for cells to grow. Brains also have glial cells that act as scaffolding for your brain. So there are multiple different types of neurons, and one of the type of neuron is called a glial cell. The reason it's special is because it's pretty much just there to help hold the brain together and keep it in the geometry or geography that works for it. Whenever you see a brain, you'll notice that it does consistently have pretty much the exact same shape, despite being made up of cells that are kind of goopy and manipulatable. The glial cells help the neurons stay connected in the ways that they're supposed to be connected, instead of just sliding around. I think we'll see a video or a GIF of a brain later on in the class. They're actually pretty squishy things, which is gross, so I apologize. Okay, so the human brain, just like muscles, our brains grow when we use them. They don't exactly grow larger, but instead they grow more complex. As we use our brain all the time, it learns, it creates habits. And I will argue over the course of this semester that everything that we do and learn is a form of habits. So when I just covered this, when you are learning, what's going on is your brain actually making new neuronal connections. You may have heard that your neurons or your brain works via electricity. The electricity is actually what happens within a neuron, but the connections hooked up together by those neurotransmitters are what allow neurons to talk to each other. It's cool to say, it might be cool to learn or notice or realize that when you are learning something, you are literally making connections in your head. I don't know if that's where that phrase came from, but I thought it was really cool when I learned that making connections in your head is actually pretty true of what's going on in your brain. Okay, neuroplasticity. This is a really cool topic. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to adapt and change and improve over time. Here's a question for you. What happens when a person loses a part of their brain? Say maybe it's damaged or it needs to be removed because they have a tumor or they have seizures or some other medical problem. What happens over time to that brain? Well, there are actually many, many cases of people having suffered damage to their brains, and one of my most favorite cases is the case of a little girl. I think she was 2 or 3 at the time. She had really, really bad seizures in half of her brain, and they started in that half of the brain, but they spread to the rest of the brain, and they were causing some major damage, and they threatened to destroy her life. The only solution that doctors were able to come up with was to literally remove half of her brain. So my question to you is this. Do you think this little girl was able to live a normal life? Take a moment. Think about it. What do you think? 3, pausing here for 3, 2, 1. So the actual result was that the girl was able to live a perfectly normal life. She started out having forgotten how to do a lot of things. She had to relearn how to walk. She had to relearn how to talk. But children learn things very, very quickly, and their brains are more capable of adapting and changing and growing and improving. Eventually, the girl is totally normal, despite only having half a brain, because that half of the brain had adapted to compensate for the other half's job. Neuroplasticity is, again, your brain's ability to grow and change and improve. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. If you click this link, there is a video and a news story about a lady who had some severe brain trauma from some terrible thing that happened in her head, and she lost the ability to move her body of her own will, which is very unfortunate. But the great thing about this lady and about this video is that she was able to regain all of the things that she lost through hard work and dedication. I'm going to give you a moment here to pause and watch the video. We did watch it in class. So here's your moment. 3, 2, 1. I love that video. It's pretty dang moving, and maybe not a surprise anymore given how common these stories are of people surviving and improving after major brain damage. But neuroplasticity is kind of what explains what's going on there. One last point on this slide. Have you ever noticed that children grow and learn faster than adults? It seems as though the older you get, the harder it is to learn new things. Do you think there's any reason for that? Is there a benefit to learning more slowly as you grow older? I'll pause for a moment to give you a chance to think about it. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so here's an answer. Part of the reason that children are really good at learning is because their brains are designed to learn. They don't know a heck of a lot, and so they need to be able to pick stuff up super quickly. What's the other thing that children do super quickly? They forget. Turns out that learning and forgetting are kind of two sides of the same coin. Alternatively, as you grow older, you have a larger and larger knowledge base of information that you need to hold on to. The more you know, the more important it is to remember what you know. Turns out that your ability to learn new things quickly, again, like I said, is kind of the other side of the coin of forgetting things quickly. So the reason that as we grow up we learn more slowly is because our brain is more dedicated to remembering and using the things that we've already learned. There's actually a study that shows that you can inject a certain chemical into a mouse's brain, and that chemical will activate the gene that is all about getting the brain to learn really, really quickly and effectively. And if you do that to a mouse, they'll return to a stage of learning capacity similar to a baby mouse. However, just like a baby mouse, they'll forget things very, very, very quickly too. So there's a bit of a trade-off. You don't need to know all of that stuff. As long as you understand the idea of neuroplasticity, we're good to go. Okay, so we've got lots of vocabulary going on here in this new slide. The anatomy of a neuron. We're going to learn how these neurons work and what their major pieces are. You don't need to know everything on this slide. Like I said, focus on learning the vocabulary based on the underlined things. So I'm going to go through all of it, but all you need to know for sure are these 3 underlined vocab terms. So this is what a neuron looks like. It's got kind of a really simple structure. It's a cell. You can see it's got the cell nucleus there. The main part of the cell is called the cell body. And this is what receives and works with information from other neurons or parts of your body. For example, these dendrites, tentacles that kind of come out a short distance to connect with other neurons, could also be connected to the cells of your eyes. And through that connection, receive information, interpret, and work with visual information that then gets sent off through the axon to other neurons at synapses. We'll talk about synapses more so in a moment, but to make sure that I say it, axons, or an axon, is the long part of a neuron that is dedicated to sending electrical impulses from the cell body all the way to the terminal branches of the axon where it hooks up to different neurons. You can kind of think of it as receiving and working with information, sending information out to other neurons. The way this electricity works is a little bit complicated. It's kind of an interesting bit of chemistry, but it's good for you to know that the electrical impulse that travels down the neuron through the axon to other neurons is called an action potential. Another interesting or important part of the axon is the myelin sheath. So that's a little fatty bit of material that goes around the axon, and it actually helps the action potential travel more quickly through the neuron, through the axon. as you grow older, these myelin sheaths get thinner and thinner and thinner, and actually that is one of the reasons that our brain slows down. Because these myelin sheaths start to disappear over time as we grow, the electricity travels a little bit more slowly and results in more slow thinking. The electricity, the action potential, travels at the same speed as it does for nerves, at about, I think it was 90 feet per second, which is really quick, but still not instantaneous. And it's, an interesting fact about how this works is that that delay is crucial for how our mind works. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about that, let me know and I can find information on it for you. I don't think I've included it here. So just to help you learn the 3 terms that you need to know, I've put together a mnemonic here, just something that might help you remember what these are and what they mean. Dendrites, I think of them in terms of stalagmites because they're kind of short and they stick out. And their job is to receive messages from other cells. Axons, you can remember them with the idea or the phrase axarm because an axon is the arm that extends out of the neuron to reach to other neurons. For action potential, I didn't really include a mnemonic, but this might help you. The reason it's called an action potential is because the neuron builds up potential energy in the form of that electricity, which then, as an action, gets sent out through the axon to other neurons. So that's why it's called an action potential. Hopefully that helps you remember that. Okay, so this video does a great job of explaining synapses as well as the parts of the neuron in a different way. We're going to see a lot of crash course videos in this class. I'm not going to show you the video in this video, but feel free to go ahead and click on the link now and watch the video. I've got these 2 pictures here to show roughly where I would try and pause the video and stop the video during class. So if you want, just watch the video until you get to this image. If you'd like, you can watch the rest of the video, but it wouldn't be following normal class time. So I'm going to go ahead and pause so you can watch the video up to at least this bit here. 3, 2, 1. Okay, and just to reiterate, synapses are the connection points between neurons. Synapses are where neurotransmitters get sent from one neuron, one axon to the next neuron to its dendrites. So there are many different types of neurotransmitters. I'm not going to require you to learn all of them, or I'm not sure if I even require you to learn any particular one, but I'd like to present them to you and give you an idea of what they do. So you've probably heard of adrenaline. It excites you, gets you ready to do things. If you're about to fall, or if you almost fall, you might feel a wave of kind of excitement go through your body, and that is literally adrenaline traveling kind of from where it gets made throughout your bloodstream to all of the cells in your body and into your mind. Other in addition to being used in your body, adrenaline is used in the mind in synapses to communicate certain types of information, mostly related to fight or flight. We'll talk more about fight or flight in another time during the class, but the real quick and dirty, fight or flight is your body's reaction to a dangerous or extreme situation. You're always going to react either by fighting back on whatever the situation is, or flight, trying to run away. Okay, so there's quite a few other types of neurotransmitters. These are ones that you may not have heard about before. Noradrenaline works with concentration. Dopamine, serotonin are some pretty common ones that you might see just even in regular media. Dopamine is most often associated to pleasure, serotonin to mood and mood control. GABA is a calming neurotransmitter. Acetylcholine you may have heard here and there. It has a lot to do with learning. I may have just known about it because I'm a psych person, and I kind of don't remember where I learned all this stuff. Endorphins are things that you may have heard before. I do believe those are going to be a vocab term later in the PowerPoint, and they're most associated with euphoria and feeling good. Here's a nice little GIF that kind of shows, not perfectly accurately, but some idea of how neurotransmitters work. You can think of them as working in groups, and the relationships between how much of different neurotransmitters are sent out or being used can explain kind of what results they are having in your mind. So looks like love is a lot of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Happiness is a lot of serotonin, but not so much dopamine and oxytocin. You can see kind of what's going on. I really like this GIF. It's not the most accurate thing, but it does give you a good job of representing kind of how the neurotransmitters work. Okay, so let's talk about how neurons work. Neurons have an all or nothing response system. What does that mean? Well, remember we said that electrical impulses get sent across axons. Now, the way neurons send those electrical impulses is kind of as a yes or no, an all or nothing system. Either there's an electrical pulse traveling through the axon, or there isn't. There's no such thing as a partial activation. That being said, we'll learn more about, actually it's on this slide. Neurons are always constantly firing. They kind of fire several times every minute, some faster and some slower, and you can think of actually the rate at which they fire, the rate at which those action potentials go off, as transmitting information or certain types of information. If you know a little bit about computers, you can think about action potentials and their all or nothing response system just like ones and zeros in computer language, or yeses and no signals. The more often a neuron fires, the stronger the signal is sending. There's no such thing as a stronger or weaker electrical signal that it'll send, but instead it'll just fire more or less rapidly to send a stronger or weaker signal. Again, there's a lot of extra information here. As long as you understand the idea of the all or nothing response system, you're golden. Okay, so how do neurons store and remember information? I see here that this is the slide where we were talking about the rate of firing. So on average, neurons fire once every few seconds, and the rate of firing changes how it what information it is transmitting, or the strength at which it's transmitting that information. Neurons are connected or interconnected and form neural circuits. So you can imagine pretty simple neural circuits in your head. Say, for example, one that looks like this. Information from your nose comes into your brain, and it's information that says you smell something tasty. Then a neuron might send tasty signal to the next neuron that takes that information and goes, okay, well, let's start getting hungry. And then that neuron might send information to another neuron that says, okay, well, let's start salivating. Let's start putting together saliva in preparation for eating, and they might send signals over to neurons that help you feel hunger in your belly and make that kind of thing happen. And there's a lot of different connections that those neurons could have, and a lot of the times these are called circuits, especially because they can be a little bit circular. The neuron connected to your nose might connect to your mind, make you feel hungrier, and then that connection might go back to your nose and make you pay more attention to the smell, which would in turn make you hungrier and have kind of an infinite loop until you do something about it, or until you get bored. Fun fact, neurons do get tired, and so if you've done too much with a neuron, it'll slow down or stop reacting. In the same way that, like, if someone pokes you and keeps their finger poked up into you for a long time, you'll eventually stop noticing it. So how do neurons hold on to information? How can we say that the brain stores information? Well, we talked about neuronal connections being one way that you learn, but another way that we learn is through the idea of population coding. This idea is that multiple neurons work together to store or have or work with the same to come up with a bit of information. Sorry, let me try again. Multiple neurons work together to represent bits of information in your mind. So here on the right, we have a simple representation of what this might be. Imagine in your brain you have stored the idea of bananas, looks like a mango, apple, pineapple, and we're looking at 4 different neurons, and it just so happens that these neurons have all to do with fruit. And so we call them a neuron 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so when you look at the banana, it could be that neuron 1 and 3 fire more quickly. When you look at the mango, neurons 2 and 4 fire more quickly. The apple, 2, 3, and 4 fire more quickly. Pineapple, 1, 2, 3 fire more quickly. So in that way, the same set of 1, 2, 3, 4 neurons can each code, working together, different bits of information by firing at different rates and in different combinations. So that's the idea of population coding, the idea that sometimes we store information by having multiple neurons work together to store the information. Okay, electrical connections versus chemical signals. So neurotransmitter activity allows for short-term thinking. We talked about that. I think it was on the first slide that I mentioned it. Moment-to-moment, day-to-day thoughts occur through the chemical interactions of neurotransmitters, sending information from one neuron to the other. And like I said earlier, neurons can get exhausted. Part of the reason that neurons can get exhausted is because it takes time for neurons to re-up themselves from having expressed or excreted those neurotransmitters. Obviously, they have to have some sort of bank for the neurotransmitters, and once they've sent out all of the neurotransmitter that they have, it takes a while for them to get those neurotransmitters back and be able to use them again. The process of neurons absorbing used neurotransmitters is called reuptake. So when the neurotransmitters get zooped out of this neuron, some of them go into the other neuron, some of them kind of go into a soup in your brain, and they slowly get absorbed back into the neuron for reuse. One of the ways that the neurons get cleaned up or reuptaken is during sleep. So one of the reasons that lack of sleep can make you dumber, can make you hallucinate, can make you forget, can make you is that your brain doesn't have as much opportunity to clean up the neurotransmitters as if you did take a nap or fall asleep. Neuronal connections allow for longer-term learning. So those are the creations of those new synapses we were talking about earlier. Interestingly, there's no way for us to be totally 100% sure that you forget anything you've ever learned or experienced in your life. This is because, to some extent, there are always going to be echoes of neuronal connections in your mind. Connections happen all the time, and although you might not be able to remember a certain bit of information, it may still be encoded in those connections in some way. There's really no way for us to yet prove that something can be totally forgotten. That's especially true if you think about population coding. So if, as long as one or a couple of the neurons that learned an idea still exist in your brain, well, maybe a part of that idea is still in there. There's also a period during which the action potential can no longer fire after it has fired once. Just like it takes a moment or some time for neurotransmitters to be reuptaken, there is a refractory period for the firing of action potentials, for the firing of electricity through axons, and it's just a moment for the ions in your neurons or around the neurons to be kind of reshuffled into a state that allows for another firing. So the reason that neurons fire only every couple of seconds is because it needs a moment to get ready and recharge to fire again. Just like an Etch-a-Sketch, when we go to sleep, neurotransmitters get cleaned up. So that's why an Etch-a-Sketch is on there. Let's move on to part 2. The brain and the body. We've already talked about that a little bit, and we'll see some of the same stuff that I've already mentioned. But let's talk about endorphins and opiates. Endorphins are a type of neurotransmitter that makes us feel happy or excited or to ease pain. When we kiss someone, when we eat chocolate, when we pet our dogs, our bodies release endorphins that make us feel better and ease our pain. This is one of the reasons why walking makes you feel better, because whenever we do exercise, our body releases endorphins. If you've ever experienced or heard of a runner's high, that's where from running, your body starts to release a bunch of endorphins that make you feel absolutely great. If you're having a hard time, if you're mad or sad or just need to think about something that's troubling you, take a walk. The endorphins that your body releases will help calm you down. I promise that if you feel troubled by anything, taking a walk will help you calm down and think more objectively, because endorphins are being released in your body. I've done it lots of times when I was worried about something, and I really encourage you to do the same. Opiates are chemicals like opium or morphine that can mimic the effects of endorphins. So, in essence, opiates are drugs either for legal medical use or for illegal use that can make you feel good just like endorphins do. But be aware that because they are artificially affecting how you feel, you can build up a tolerance to those chemicals. And you can build up a tolerance to your own endorphins, to the point where if you overuse opiates, you no longer are able to feel happy without that extra opiate addition into your body. That can result in withdrawal, where you feel absolutely terrible because you're missing your natural ability to ease your own pain. I see there's a extra bit there, so check that out if you're interested in learning more about endorphins or opiates. Okay, the nervous system. The nervous system deals with information in our bodies, most strongly associated with transmitting information from our mind to the rest of our body, but it also incorporates our brain and spine. The nervous system can be divided into two subsections. The central nervous system, as shown in this GIF here, incorporates pretty much just your brain and your spine, here in this kind of green thing. And the peripheral nervous system, all these purple, now flashing nerves, which connect your body to your brain and your spine. Note that nerves are extensions of neurons. Neurons mostly exist in the brain and the spine, but nerves help carry information from the brain and the spine to the rest of your body. There's some interesting things about that we'll learn here in a moment. Oh, well, here you go. Nerves are bundles of axons, extensions from neurons, and they exist throughout your body and can be really, really big. For example, the largest nerve is called the sciatic nerve and hooks up kind of the bottom of your spine through your leg down to your feet. Your body has several nerve clusters throughout the body. What do these nerve clusters do? Well, you can almost think of them as little brains. In fact, we have nerve clusters for a lot of our major organs throughout our guts. You have a nerve cluster in your butt, which is really helpful in controlling your legs. It kind of acts as a relay station to receive information from the brain, encode it in a way that your legs can understand, and send it off down the line. Part of the reason we have a big nerve cluster in your butt is because as mammals, our ancestors had tails, and tails were a very complicated structure in the body which required a lot of information, and so we needed to have a big butt neural cluster. Because your feet are kind of the end points of a lot of major nerve connections, if you ever get a foot massage, you might feel effects of the foot massage throughout the rest of your body. And that's because those nerves need to have traveled throughout the rest of your body and are kind of interconnected. The idea of foot reflexology comes out of this, and I know that a number of Asian cultures have ideas about the different pieces of your body or parts of your body that are connected to different parts of your foot. I don't know a whole lot about all that stuff and how accurate or not it is, but it is interesting to know that you kind of feel things throughout your body thanks to the nerves being stimulated through a foot massage. So if you have an SO or someone who loves you, or maybe you can go get a massage, pay attention and see if you can figure out which part of your feet is connected to or seems to be connected to different parts of your body. Pretty cool little detail. Okay, let's talk about different types of neurons. We're just going to focus on these three: sensory neurons, interneurons, and motor neurons. And they're pretty dang straightforward. Sensory neurons receive information from your senses. These are all throughout your body. So you'll have sensory neurons for your skin and for your eyes and your ears and for all your other senses. There are interneurons that act as connections between sensory neurons and motor neurons, and there are motor neurons that act as to send information to your muscles so you can move. Bear in mind there are lots and lots of other neurons doing lots and lots of different things in your brain, but these different types of neurons or cells are the ones that are mostly going to be throughout your body sending and receiving information. Pretty straightforward, right? Let's talk about reactions. There's a cool video here that we could talk about, and a website that talks about how reactions work. I really encourage you to take a look at that, learn a little bit more about it. But so I'll pause here for a moment. 3, 2, 1. What are reactions and reflexes? Well, a reflex is a result of a certain neural circuit or nerve circuit in your body. Shown here, you have a sensory neuron in your leg that receives information from your skin and your muscles and lots of other things. I'm not sure all the different things that receive information, but receive information from your leg, from your senses. That neuron, that sensory neuron, sends information down the line through these interneurons that are going to be in your spine. And those interneurons are going to send information up to your brain and receive information down from the brain and send information back towards the motor nerves. But your sensory and motor nerves are hooked up pretty dang closely. In fact, there are many ways in which your sensory and motor neurons are hooked up directly to each other through just a couple of interneurons without going through your brain. I can prove this for you. If you've ever felt something that's really, really, really hot or cold, or if you've been zapped by electricity, you'll notice that you react to it instantly without even thinking. You'll bring your hand back or move your leg back. That's because those neural circuits are set up to react as fast as they can to dangerous, damaging stimulation. If you're getting burnt, your body is going to do everything it can to get away from that burning as quickly as possible. And the time it takes for information to travel up to your brain might be too long. It might cause more damage to you. So those direct connections are what form our reflex reactions. Here's another visualization of the same idea. You can see here, a person's got a hand. Whoops, they decided that they wanted to touch fire. Well, the heat activates skin receptors, which are connected to sensory neurons. They send information up through your arm to your spine through a series of interneurons. Remember, the interneurons are connected from your sensory to your motor neurons, but also to your brain. And that sends information back to your arm, back to the finger, and the motor neurons might tell your finger, get out of there, you're hurting yourself. So that jerk reaction from touching a flame results from the reflex reaction of the direct connection between sensory and motor neurons. Okay, so let's talk about more ways to break down the nervous system. I know they seem like a lot, but they're really not that complicated. So, we've also already mentioned that the nervous system has a central and a peripheral uh, half to it. Central being your brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system has a couple more subsections. First up, the uh, autonomic and somatic subsections. The autonomic and somatic subsections are pretty simple. They're easy to understand. Autonomic means automatic, so things that your body does automatically. Somatic, things that you do on purpose consciously. Within the autonomic subsection of your peripheral nervous system, you have sympathetic and parasympathetic subsections. The sympathetic nervous system is all about getting your body ready to react to things. It has a lot to do with adrenaline. Whenever you feel scared, excited, or maybe you feel pain, your body gets ready to act. That means that the sympathetic nervous system will send blood to your muscles and take blood away from things that are not necessary in emergency situations. Like it'll take blood away from your organs dedicated to processing food. It'll take blood away. It'll also do things that will help you act in a dangerous situation. For example, your sympathetic nervous system is responsible for stopping you from being able to pee in an emergency situation. For the most part, it can be really, really hard to pee if you're very excited, if you have adrenaline pumping through you, because it's not helpful to be able to pee while you're running away or fighting a bear, for example. The parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. Unsurprisingly, it calms you down. So it does things like lower your heart rate and move blood back to the intestines to help you process food during times of calm. Okay, so the somatic nervous system, dealing with consciously done things in your body. You can divide the somatic system down into sensory inputs and motor outputs, kind of like the sensory and motor neurons. You don't really need to know this because we'd already talked about sensory and motor neurons, so make sure you just take away from this slide the nervous system's divisions of peripheral, central, autonomic, somatic, sympathetic, parasympathetic. I love this little GIF. It does a great job of representing what the sympathetic nervous system might do. So if you're driving a fast car, your hair follicles might straighten, your eyes might dilate, and your blood might start pumping more quickly from your heart. Okay, let's see, how much more do we have here? We'll finish out this part before and pause the video at the end of it. So, the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the part of your body dedicated with working with chemical information systems. If your neurons transmit information electrically throughout your body from senses to muscles, your endocrine system transmits information using chemicals such as neurotransmitters. The endocrine system uses hormones like neurotransmitters for your body, hormones which are like neurotransmitters for your body, to send different messages through your bloodstream. The pituitary gland is the major actor in the endocrine system. You can see the pituitary gland up in here in kind of one of the deeper parts of your brain. We'll see that in another picture in a moment here. You can also see a number of the major glands that act in the endocrine system. They're all glands because their job is to secrete hormones. So you've got the hypothalamus and the pineal gland in your brain. Remember, the pineal gland is the little dude that people used to think was associated to your soul, but now we know it does something a little bit different. You also have thyroid gland, thalamus, pancreas, adrenal gland, famous for being where a lot of adrenaline comes from. So when you feel adrenaline, this is why you might feel the wave of adrenaline kind of coming from the center of your body outwards throughout, spreading out to your arms and to your extremities. Of course, we also have a couple of very important glands down in our genitals, which are different for men and for women because they need to do different jobs. I'd really encourage you to watch this video here. As always, I'll pause for a moment so you can take a look. 3, 2, 1. Okay. The last thing to know about the endocrine system is that it is responsible for doing that sympathetic nervous response. So your nervous system connects to your endocrine system, which sends out the hormones to help your body prepare for your fight or flight response. Here's another slide just showing you in a little bit better detail what how the brain structures are set up. There's a couple different brain structures, and I won't require you to learn really very many of them. But just to give you an idea of the size and location of your pineal gland, and just to walk through what this part of the brain is, the different parts of the brain. Actually, never mind. I won't walk you through that right now because we have a section dedicated to it later on. The pituitary gland. Remember, it's one of the most important glands in your body. Is located kind of down here in the front, next to your brain stem. The way I remember the pituitary gland is a little crass, but in my head it's always kind of been truck nuts for your brain. Are truck nuts still a thing? Not sure, but they always kind of looked like that and are positioned like that for me. So maybe that helps you remember that information. Okay, and so this is just a kind of a summary of some of the things that you may have noticed going on in this section. You can think of the way information is transmitted in your brain and in your body in two ways, electrical and chemical. And we also have brain versus body information transmission. In your brain, there are electrical transmissions going on called action potentials that go across axons in your neurons. The brain also uses electrical information transmission in your central nervous system, most especially with your interneurons. Remember that the central nervous system is going to be comprised of your brain and your spine and work mostly with interneurons because they receive information from senses and send information to motor neurons. Also in your brain, we have chemical information transfer through the use of neurotransmitters, which get sent out from one neuron to another neuron in synapses, the connections between neurons. In your brain, we also have endorphins that get excreted due to things such as exercise or meeting a loved one or petting your dog that make us feel great. There's lots of different ways neurotransmitters do different things, but endorphins is a really simple and easy one to learn and understand. In your body, we also have electrical and chemical information transfer. So the body's electrical information transfer is mostly going to be related to the peripheral nervous system that uses sensory and motor neurons to receive and send information from senses and to your muscles. Reflexes go through the spine and react very, very quickly. You can think of reflexes as simple neural or nerve circuits that go kind of almost directly from sensory to intermotor neurons so that you can react quickly to important information like, oh, I'm burning. There is also chemical information transmitted in your body through the use of the endocrine system and hormones from your glands. So to give you an example of what those hormones might do, of course there's adrenaline, but another example of what hormones might do is tell your body to get ready for being able to reproduce sexually. So as we all know, in adolescence, when we're teenagers, our bodies start producing hormones that start to do things to the rest of our bodies. For guys, start growing facial hair. For girls, start doing different things to different parts of your body to get both the guys and the girls ready to reproduce. It might not be a surprise, therefore, that endocrine and hormones, or these chemical systems in your body, are a slower, longer term of information transfer, whereas the electrical information in your body is a quicker, moment-to-moment information transfer. Funny thing is, in your brain, the opposite is true. Neurotransmitters, your brain's chemical information system, are for quicker, moment-to-moment transformations of knowledge and information. The electrical action potentials are for quicker information transfer, and this is kind of where the analogy falls apart, because remember also the connections are all about the longer term learning in your brain. And connections take time to grow. They literally have to have cells grow and reach out and connect to each other. Okay, I'm going to pause the video here because my voice is starting to hurt, and because we've covered about half of the material, maybe a little bit more or a little bit less. The next video is going to cover parts 3 and 4, brain structures and consciousness. So thanks for watching the video, and I hope you found it enjoyable.